Thanks very much, Ahmed, for planning such an awesome event and for inviting me to speak at it. So what I've decided to do for the next 20 minutes or so is to take you along the journey of how Because Animals came to be and focus specifically on why we must begin to consider the pet food industry far more than we have been doing if we are to ever see an end to industrial animal farming. And so ultimately, I'm here today because I love animals. And it seems as though Michelle and I had a similar idea by sort of reverting to our childhood in starting these slides. But I grew up with 3 dogs and 3 cats, and I developed a really close relationship with animals at a young age. And for that reason, I stopped eating meat in my early teens, and I spent much of my adolescent and adult life volunteering at various rescue organizations. But in addition to my love for animals, there's also something else that I can't live without, and that's science. So exploring and understanding life at the cellular and molecular levels has always been a total fascination of mine. But as a biomedical researcher, something that I'm deeply uncomfortable with is the exploitation of animals in science. And even for people like myself who didn't perform animal studies, if one is working on anything that has an application on human health, at some point your work is going to touch an animal. And I was able to somehow live in denial with this for most of my career. But during my postdoc, there was one experience in particular that left me with a horrible image seared in my brain. And I more or less decided on the spot that I was on the wrong side of the line. I didn't want to remain in a walk of life that kept animals inside of any supply chain. And if I was going to remain in science, then I was going to apply my training to taking them out of use. And if I couldn't use my science to do that, then I was prepared to give it up altogether. But fortunately, that didn't happen. I was living in the Bay Area in this incredible place in the world where anything and everything is possible. And luckily for me, around the same time, I had just learned about the launch of Clara Foods, which is now the Every Company, as well as Moofree, now Perfect Day. And of course, at the time, still Stanford professor Pat Brown, who is the CEO of Impossible Foods. And I was beyond inspired by these people and these companies. They were using science to take animals out of the supply chain, which to me was just phenomenal. And it seems like forever ago, but it was about 5.5 years ago. And I cold called Isha Datar, who's shown here in this pic, but she's also the executive director of New Harvest. And I didn't really expect her to get back to me, but she did. And she was so incredibly encouraging. And that was all I needed to start down this path. And I didn't look back. Isha, I don't know if you're here today, but if you are, I've told you this before, you were then and you continue to be one of my biggest inspirations. So thank you. And I'll stop with the gush there. But so yeah, these folks were working on some pretty amazing things. And so the next thing I started thinking about was how I could make an impact. And at first I thought I would do something aimed at replacing animal-based products for human consumption, because humans, of course, are the main consumers of animal-based products. But then I started thinking about it a bit more, and as someone who hasn't eaten meat for decades, I wasn't struggling. There were loads of plant-based options for me and more companies and products coming onto the scene every day. But my options were slim when it came to feeding my pets. So if you walk into any pet food store, you'll find aisles stacked with meat-based products for cats and dogs. If you're lucky, you might find a natural, balanced vegetarian food for dogs, but you won't find a thing for cats. But again, my main motivation was to do something that could have an impact in taking animals out of the supply chain. And it wasn't immediately obvious to me that targeting pet food was the way to go. Because perhaps, as some of you might also believe, I understood that since pet food is mostly made of the byproducts of the human food supply chain, the contribution of meat in pet food somehow doesn't count for as much. And to highlight this point, in 2015, the National Renderers Association, or the NRA, who have since changed their names for obvious reasons, I think, to the North American Renderers Association, so NARA, they published a paper describing all the ways in which pet food is a sustainable industry. So specifically, pet food is made up of the byproducts, or the 50% of the animal that humans don't want to eat. And in addition to that 50% of the animal, there's also the fallen animals. And these are animals that die before making it to slaughter. So they die in transit due to suffocation, dehydration, from disease. And if an animal dies before it's actually slaughtered, it cannot be sold to the human food supply chain. So in terms of amounts, in Canada and the US alone, this number is 25 million tons of animal byproducts and fallen animals per year. So this is a lot of unsellable, inedible carcass that the animal agriculture industry has to do something about. Not only because there would otherwise be a significant monetary loss to the animal agriculture industry if it wasn't able to actually extract this value from this meat, but B, the animal agriculture industry would also have to pay to have all of this meat disposed of as biohazardous waste. And according to NARA themselves, in this instance, all landfills in the US would be full within 4 years of rotting animal material. So rather than this happening, the animal byproducts and the fallen animals are instead sent to something called a rendering facility, where it's processed into pet food. So what is rendering? That's when this heavily contaminated meat from the byproducts and fallen animals, those are also termed 4D meat, animals that are dead, diseased, dying, and disabled. They are blended together and subjected to incredibly high heats and temperatures or pressures in order to sterilize the meat. And it's this practice of rendering that NARA claims promotes sustainability. So ultimately, rendering is the reason why we have been led to believe that pet food is a sustainable practice. I mean, quoting NARA themselves, in the absence of the ability, in the absence of rendering and the ability to sell all of this meat to pet food, the animal agriculture industry as we know it could simply not exist. So this is staggering, and that's why I'm going to say it again. In the absence of being able to sell animal byproducts and fallen animals to pet food, animal agriculture could not exist. So really, it is not the environmental protection that the rendering industry is sustaining, but rather the animal agriculture industry itself, which we, of course, already know to be among the most destructive and unsustainable industries our planet has ever known. So this is why, rather than creating plant-based or cultured meat-based products for humans, I, along with my co-founder, Joshua Arrett, started Because Animals. Pet food is an industry that is massively overlooked in terms of its contribution to animal agriculture. And the really terrifying thing about it is that aside from the relatively few companies that are making plant or microorganism-based pet foods as alternatives to meat-based pet food, this category is largely a white space in terms of innovations that could really move the needle. So once we were convinced that focusing on pet food was indeed our best path forward, the next question was, do we focus on a meat alternative, such as plant or microbial-based foods, or do we make meat, just make it differently? And I'm going to take you through our thought process. So unlike humans who are omnivores, cats are obligate carnivores. So in the wild, they really do need to consume another animal in order to obtain all of the nutrients they need. Now, we know that cats, dogs, humans, all animals require specific nutrients rather than specific ingredients in order to survive and thrive. And we know that this argument is valid for our pets because commercial pet food relies on it. And to prove this to yourself, if you have a cat at home, take a look at the ingredient panel on their food. You'll see a long list of vitamins and minerals such as taurine, various B vitamins, certain amino acids, all added back to the food in synthetic form. This is because most of the nutrients that would otherwise be found in meat in the wild are effectively lost from the meat in pet food during that intense rendering and sterilization process. So all of those nutrients that cats as carnivores need Well, in commercial pet food, those nutrients are not coming from the meat itself, but rather from the synthetic supplements that are added back to the food. So the crazy thing is that we know that we can produce a nutritionally complete diet for cats and dogs, providing them with all the nutrients they need from non-meat sources, but we're not doing it. And that's because this categorization carnivore intuitively tells people that cats need meat. And in the wild, that's true, but not when it comes to commercial pet food. So nonetheless, though, the current pet food industry really reinforces the notion that it's the meat in pet food that actually contributes is the source of all the nutrients for our carnivorous pets. And people really have no reason to question that. So despite there being scientific studies showing us that properly balanced plant-based diets for both cats and dogs can be nutritionally complete, we immediately see the reluctance from consumers to consider this nutrients versus ingredients logic when we look at the sales figures of plant-based products for taxonomic carnivores like cats and dogs versus omnivores such as humans. And because of their taxonomic classification, plant-based products will always be niche at best when it comes to feeding our pets. So where both plant-based and cultured meat-based options are viable for humans, if we are ever to move the needle in terms of creating a truly sustainable and ethical pet food, our only option really is cultured meat. And that's where Because Animals comes in. We recognize the nutrients versus ingredients logic, but we also recognize that people simply want to feed their pets meat. And for this reason, we are not creating a meat alternative. We are creating meat that is instead produced in an alternative way. And that means making cultured meat. So we started with mouse being the ancestral diet of the cat. In the wild, cats eat mice, small birds, and insects. And although chicken and beef are among the leading ingredients in commercial pet food, they are also the main allergens for our cats and dogs. So in making cultured meat, we really saw this as an opportunity to grow the meat source that's most evolutionarily appropriate for our pets. We grow those mouse cells basically in a media that has all the nutrients they need. We do not use FBS. We do not use any animal ingredients in our media. And then you can sort of see these clumps of mouse meat here. And then we transfer those cells from these sort of smaller scale spinner flasks up to these larger volumes as shown here in this 30-liter tank. So this past summer, Because Animals launched actually our first cultured meat product, or soft launch, and that's these cultured meat cat treats. And what I mean by soft launch is that my co-founder, Josh, shown here, he baked our cookies with our meat in a commercial kitchen, and then he took these packages to Super Zoo, which is the largest global pet trade show. And it was there that we publicly unveiled this product and made it available for pre-order to customers, both directly from our website, as well as for distributors interested in selling this product. And we did this largely to sort of show to the world, show to ourselves, show to our investors, like there is a lot of demand for this product. And we were successful in showing that. But where we are today is now getting ready to sort of double down and actually raise the funds that we need in order to produce this product at scale, which is next on the list, and then make it available for retail. So we're pretty excited about that day. I think at this moment, yeah, I'm gonna wrap up, but I have one more thing to say, and that is that excitingly, we've recently opened up a second lab in beautiful Vienna, Austria, which is where I live. And we are looking for amazing scientists to join our team. So if you happen to be an amazing scientist, then I'd love for you to get in touch. I'd love anybody to get in touch if they want to talk to me, but especially those scientists. So yeah, I'm going to stop there. So thank you.